Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Hi, I'm Dr. Renee Hilliard. I am both a physician and a sex, love, and relationship coach. And I'm here to talk about loneliness today. So, loneliness is something that I suffered from for years. I was a shy, single person. And so I went through stretches of time without partners, and I felt like I spent most of my adult life alone until recently when I started overcoming shyness. I spent a lot of time alone. I spent most of my 20s, 30s, and even my early 40s alone. And even when I was with partners, I would choose partners who preferred to be by themselves. I buried myself in my work and did other things to try to feel less lonely, but I realized that that was something that needed to be healed before I could call in appropriate partners for myself. I really had to look at the reason for feeling lonely. And, I've heard from people that being alone may not be a choice, but feeling lonely is always a choice. And that didn't make sense to me for so many years. I was like, yeah, that's good. That's easy for you to say because you have somebody. But I realized over time that really the deep feeling of loneliness was something missing within myself that had to be healed in order to even feel when I was with a partner that I was actually with them. When I was with partners, sometimes I would feel alone, even more lonely than when I was by myself. So I wanted to share some of my wisdom around that, and you can take it or leave it, but this is my experience that um, feeling lonely, in my own experience, has been about not loving myself, not deeply loving myself. I kind of ran that inner dialogue of I'm not enough, I'm unlovable, nobody would want me. And so I scanned the world for evidence of that. So even if I was with a partner, any time they chose to be away from me, chose to be by themselves, wanted to do something on their own on a Saturday, I would take that personally, even though there were things I wanted to do, and that was perfectly okay in my story. But if they were choosing to do something and I had reserved the whole weekend for them, even though they had not requested it, then I felt slighted. And, so it was always a setup for feeling however I wanted to feel, which was unlovable, um, not chosen, under, appreciated or whatever. And that was a story that I was running. So, of course, the world reflects back to you whatever you're running as your story on the inside. So, that loneliness, I couldn't escape even with a partner because it was more about how I was feeling about myself and the story I was telling myself. And until I changed that story, the external world was never going to reflect back to me what I thought I was wanting. So I really went on an exploration and looked at, why do I feel lonely? And a lot of it was just about not loving myself deeply enough, that being alone felt so painful because the inner dialogue was so painful, that the way I was treating myself internally was so painful that of course I wanted some distraction from it. I wanted to be around other people because I was beating myself up so much. So I had to change that pattern in order to not dread being alone, because being alone can either feel terrible or it can feel great, and that's up to you and how you talk to yourself and that kind of thing. So I really looked at that. And it wasn't like continuously that I felt that way. I would go through waves of time where I actually preferred to be alone. I like to travel alone. I've lived on my own for most of my adult life, and I actually like that in some regard. But in some respects, I actually like having my own space and calling my own shots and coming and going as I please, that sort of thing. But during those times where I wanted to feel love, and there was no one around, then I felt lonely. But I realized that nobody can ever love you exactly at the times that you're needing to feel loved. Even if you're with a partner, they're going to be busy, they're going to be distracted or working or whatever, and or away on a trip or something. So you have to, or I had to learn how to give myself as much love as I needed in order to feel securely loved like that. And that was the only place that I could get that feeling, that deep sense of self-love. Love helped to um, make me feel less lonely. I don't dread being by myself. I love it. I delight myself with all sorts of things. I get caught up in my own fantasy world and have all sorts of interesting adventures on my own. I love going out in nature and just talking to myself. Imagine, you know, interactions with nature, with animals and trees and things. And there was a time where I would have thought this sounds crazy, talking to yourself, talking to birds and things like that. But children do that, and it entertains us as children. We stop that because we think for some reason that that's immature to have imaginary friends, or to talk to yourself. Sounds weird as we get older, but I entertain myself, a lot of times just walking around, talking to birds, like that. So when I see a hummingbird, for instance, I think of my grandfather, and then I have a little conversation with him, and it makes me feel connected. So, you can say it's weird or whatever, but I have fun with it. The other thing is, I used to have this story, like, nobody likes me, so nobody ever calls me or invites me to do anything. But then if I want to do something, I can call other people to do things. And so I had to really turn that around, instead of feeling like a victim or left out, or, that I didn't belong, I wasn't accepted by others, to reach out to others, because they may feel as lonely as I do. So even though it's a little difficult at first to start doing that, to start calling people or inviting them to spend time with you, you imagine that they're going to be bothered by you, or if your self-esteem is low, you're imagining that they don't want to spend time with you. But many times they may be saying the same thing. They may be saying, she never calls me, and nobody ever wants to do anything with me. So just reaching out to people helped me feel less lonely. If I want to be with somebody, I always have the option of calling somebody and talking to them, or getting on a video with them. During COVID times, it's hard to be together physically, but you can always create space to interact with others through technology. The other thing that I realized recently that helps me feel connected is doing breathing exercises. So what I noticed in myself is that when I feel lonely, I feel very contracted in my system. I feel tight in my throat, tight in my chest and my stomach. And I also changed the way I breathe. So I breathe shallow. And even just changing the way I breathe, taking deep breaths and relaxing, actually helps soothe my nervous system. So I started doing that intentionally a few times a day, taking nice, deep, slow breaths, and that actually helps me feel more connected in the world and more in tune, and brings a sense of freedom to my nervous system. It's hard to explain, but it makes me feel relaxed and open and free and connected to the oneness of everything. This whole, you can either feel isolated and alone, or you can feel like you belong to all of humanity. And that is a mental concept, but it's your choice. You can choose to feel, separated from your family, or you can say in your mind, I'm still part of my family. They're still there, even though they're not in the room with me physically, or my friends are not physically here. I still belong to that group of friends. So it doesn't feel so lonely when you frame it that way. So I started just consciously trying to see myself as connected to the world, to my community, to the world at large, rather than thinking of myself as being isolated and alone so much. And that's a choice in your mind, to say, I'm all by myself, but I'm on this block and there's other people on this block, and I'm a part of this street, I'm a part of this town, I'm a part of this community. And one other thing I started doing before COVID, when now it's harder to, in some ways, to connect with others. I started just joining groups, and I was shy, like I said, so it was intimidating at first to do that, but I I went through the whole worst case scenario in my mind. I'm like, okay, if I join this group, this hiking group, what's the worst thing that can happen? I go there and I don't fit in and I just don't go back, no big deal. So I started joining a few groups. There was one group that took a trip to um, Hearst Castle, and I was like, I have nothing else to do today. Let me go try that. And it was fun, so I started doing more and more of that sort of thing, taking online classes and then getting to know the other people in the group, and plus learning something. I love to learn, so there was nothing to be lost there. But right now with COVID, there's so many different online programs popping up, and some are even free. So just joining those kinds of things, and then if they have a Facebook group that you can join, just going into the group and meeting new people and sharing your wisdom with them. I underestimated how much people would benefit from my wisdom, um, or from my support. When people would post things in Facebook groups, and I would comment on their posts, and people would say how much it warmed their heart, and I was like, really? I never knew I had that impact on people. But part of shyness is thinking that you're not important, and so you don't think that your comments would have an impact on somebody that would help them out, or brighten their day. But it does. So being more giving actually helps you feel more connected and makes you feel more important in the world and less isolated and less alone. The other thing I started to do was, there's a thing with loneliness that you imagine the other side of it as being all wine and roses. You say, oh, if I was with a partner, it'd be so wonderful, and be some romantic Hollywood story, fairy tale kind of thing. But the other possibility is that it could be terrible. There are people that are in relationships that are struggling right now during COVID because they're together all the time, and they don't get along with their partners. People reach out to me daily that are saying, we're fighting all the time. I can't find any ease in my system because we're in close quarters, and there's emotional abuse going on and those kinds of things. And that's not saying that all relationships are like that, but that's a possibility. And so when you're imagining the flip side of your scenario, where if you're alone, at least there's peace around you. But sometimes in partnership, there's not, and you can't find peace. Just appreciating what you do have, that you have your own space, that you have the ability to watch whatever you want on TV, and nobody's telling you shouldn't watch that, and nobody's criticizing you, and nobody's, bringing their negative energy or their fear and all this other stuff in to your space, and you can actually control your space much better if you're alone. So recognizing that, and also, there's nothing wrong with wanting a partner, but also just realizing that partnership doesn't necessarily equal happy, and happiness is something that's internal. It's not something given by the other person. That happiness is something that you foster within yourself, and you have the power to influence yourself. There's a quote by Wayne Dyer, who I love, the late Wayne Dyer. And I think it originally came from Rumi, who was like a Persian philosopher from maybe the 1200s or something. But he says, some people live in a hostile world, some people live in a loving world, and it's the same world. And with loneliness, I thought to myself, some people live in a really loving, connected world, and some people live in this lonely, separate, painful world, and it's the same world. So either you're living in love and connection, or you're living feeling separated and alone and lonely. But that's your choice, and we all choose these things, and it doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of it. I get it. I was there for so many years, but I've come to the other side of that to realize that I can be alone and still have a good time if I choose to. And if I want to be around people and I want to be connected, that's up to me to create that for myself. And even if I was with a partner, it's still up to me to create that for myself, because you can be with a partner and feel separate and feel disconnected and feel shortage of love. Or you can feel filled up and wonderful and all the things. But that's your choice. And it's empowering to know that that's your choice, that and you can always choose whichever you want, whichever story you want to tell. But if you want to tell the better story, then you have to choose that. And and that's the journey, and that's part of the art of life and the game of life, is that recognizing when I'm going back into my pattern of feeling alone. I remember being a kid and feeling alone in my family, and there were always people around. It was just, that was a story I told myself, that I'm not like anybody else, or they don't understand me, and they don't get me, and nobody likes me, and it's just a story. And I can also choose another story that feels better at any time. So that's part of the journey. And so it's a daily thing. It's there's still moments that I go through where I'll sit on the couch and feel alone because my partner's across the room, and I'm like, what in the world? I'm with somebody and I still feel alone. Let me just stop that and breathe and relax and feel love. Just love myself, feel connected to this partnership, feel connected to community, to my family, to the world at large. This separation is really a figment of our imagination. Separation, even in physics, everything is interconnected. You know, so you can either feel like you're part of the whole universe, or you can feel like you're separate from it. But that's a mental abstraction, because it's all interconnected. So that's all for now, and it's been lovely talking to you. And I love you. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to comment, and until next time.